Hey everyone, good morning. So today we are going to cover a couple of fundamentals of Apex, and last time we discussed that how we can extend the classes and all that stuff. Today we are going to cover the access modifiers. We will begin with the access modifiers and then we will talk about constructors. So two major topics we'll have to cover today. Okay, now let me create a new class. Okay, let me call it first class. Okay. So we have four type of access modifiers. Okay. Uh, Let me write it down. We have global, we have public, we have private, and then we have protected. Okay. Most of the time we use public in Salesforce, and if you'll create a class, you will see that by default it creates in a public environment. So what public says is that your class will be accessible throughout your Salesforce instance. So you create a public class, and then there is, let's say, another class which want to access this class. It will be able to, because this is a public class, it will be available throughout your Salesforce instance. Okay, but it will not be available to outside system. So let's say there is a third party system which want to access this class, they will not be able to, because it is just public for this particular Salesforce instance. It will not be available to outside of your Salesforce instance. So if you'll have to make a class which should be available throughout globe, and any third party system will be able to access that, then in that case you will create a class as global. Okay, so global class, global access modifier basically tell that this is a global class and any other third party system can also access it. Most of the time we use global access modifiers whenever we'll have to do the integration between Salesforce and other systems. And then in that case, we will create a global class so that other systems can access this class. Okay, so these are the two basic modifiers we use with the classes. Okay. Hmm. Sometimes you may get this interview question is that, can I use private with the classes? Okay, so if I try to use private with the class, it will give us an error. Okay, it will say that top level type must have public or global. Okay, so private and protected are not class level access modifiers. They are method and variable level access modifiers. You cannot use private and protected with the class. Okay, so with the class, you will only be able to use global or public. Okay, if I use protected and try to save this, we will again get the same error that protected is not allowed on classes. Okay, so public it is. Okay, now global and public are normal, easy things, and you may not get any interview question on this, but many times you get this interview question is that, what is the difference between private and protected access modifiers? Okay, so we will first understand that. Okay, we will first understand what is private and then we will see what is protected. Let me create a string, public string, my name. We already have a question. Can inner classes be private? Yes, inner classes can be private. I will show you that. Public class, let's okay, simple. Okay, and here you can system.debug, use this variable. Okay, This is public, so you will be able to use it within your class. And if you'll try to debug this, you will be able to debug this. Okay. So let me create the instance of this. And then my class dot method name, and try to execute this. So we are able to see the result. So nothing fancy we did so far. We created a public class, we created a public variable, and then we used it inside a method. So within same class, we will be able to use it. Okay, because it is public, we can even use it in the other class as well. Okay. So let me first create another class and try to see if we are able to access this variable there or not. Okay. So that will clarify our doubt is that if public variables are available outside of classes or not within Salesforce instance. Okay. So let's create another class. Let me call it the second class. Okay. Inside second class, let's say we have a public void method. Second method. And here I want to access this first class variable. Okay, so for that, how will I be able to access the first class here? By creating the instance of it. Okay, so let me create the instance of this class inside the first class, and then I will be able to access the variable. So let me call it a string second another class variable. Okay, just for the easy naming convention. Okay, and here what I'm going to do is that I will be accessing this particular variable from the first class, my name. Okay, and then I will debug this. Method does not exist. Okay, why I'm using my name as a, this is the variable, right? Okay, so what I'm doing is that we have a first class. In the first class, we have a my name variable. Okay, now I want to access this my name variable in the second class. Okay, so what we did is that in second class, we have another method, second method. Inside that, I have created the instance of our first class, and then with that instance, we are trying to access this variable. Okay, what we want to achieve is that we want to check the functionality whether public variables will be available outside of their classes or not. Public variable was available inside the class, and that's what we checked here. It was available within that class. Now we want to see that if it will be available outside the class or not. Okay, so let's try to debug this. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to create the instance of second class, my second class is equal to new second class, and dot execute this. And we are able to access this variable name Mohit. So what we checked here is that there was a variable my name in first class, and we wanted to check whether we'll be able to access it outside of this class or not when the access modifier is public. So what's the result here is that we are able to access this particular variable outside of this class when the access modifier is public. Okay, anybody has any doubt in this? Okay, nice. Now we have to check for the private. Okay, so let's say if this variable is private, okay, and save this. Now I want to check whether once we make this private, whether we'll be able to access this within that class or not. Okay, the first simple use case. So for that, let me create the instance of first class. First class is equal to new first class. And see, these things might be very easy for few, but might be difficult for somebody who has not done a lot of coding on his own. Okay, so I want them also to be very comfortable with it, and I want them to see that these are not difficult thing. These are easy thing. It's just that we feel these are difficult. So I'm going to execute this part, and we should be able to access it. Okay, so even when we make this variable private, it will be available within that class. Okay, but will it be available now in the another class? Let's check that. So in that case, I will execute this part. Okay. Now you can see that in the second class, it is saying that first class dot my name variable is not visible. Okay. So when a variable is annotated with or variable is annotated with the private access modifier, in that case that particular variable is not available outside of its class. It is only available within that class. You will not be able to access that variable outside of this class. Okay, anybody has any doubt in this? Perfect. Now coming to the major question we had, right? What is the in I'm with just okay, we've got a question. Just a silly curiosity, rather than creating instance, can't we access variable method by using in extend keyword? Yeah, we will see that. We will see that. So see, we can use the inheritance and extend the classes, but extending is not just to access the variable, it's to override the behavior as well. Okay, so whenever we are allowed to extend the class, then only we will do that. Okay, so we will see that when we check this fourth one. We have fourth access modifier, which is protected. Okay, now if I make this protected and save this, first we will check if we are able to access it within class or not, which obviously we will be, but let's check this as well. Okay,
We executed both together. We are not highlighted and executed.
okay, got it, and I always do that. See, my style is that I remove things from anonymous block whichever I don't want to execute. So that is why I'm in a habit of always clicking on execute. Okay, so we are able to access it when we make it as a protected. Now we'll have to check whether we'll be able to access it in the second class or not. Okay, so by default we will not be, because we will have to extend that class first. So if we try to do it now, we will get an error like we were getting earlier. It will say that variable is not visible or dependent class is invalid or needs recompilation. So what happens is that when we use the protected access modifier and the variable will be available within that class or any class any child class which extend this main class. Okay, so this will be available outside to the any class only if that class extend this class. Okay, so if second class extend our first class, and if I have to extend this class, I'll have to make this class as virtual as well, right? So if I try to save this without using that, it will give us error, non-virtual or non-abstract type cannot be extended. So first make it virtual and then save it. And once we make it virtual, then second class will be able to extend this. And let's save this. Now we will try to see if we are able to access this variable or not. Okay. So for that, let us again execute the highlighted one. And this time we will not get any error. Okay. So this time we are able to access this variable and we are getting the value of it. So what I wanted from this is that you understand the difference between private and protected. When we use private, we will not be able to use that variable outside of this class. Okay, so when we don't want to expose our variable to the outside of that class, we will use the private. Okay, if we want to create a public variable and we want that variable should be available or accessible everywhere in your org, then we will use the public. When we don't want it to be exposed to outside of your Salesforce class, we will use private. When we want to have a functionality where any class which extend your base class should be able to access it, then we can use the protected as well. Okay, very rarely you will see protected, but you should know what's the difference. Okay, and whenever in an interview you get this question and you will, if you have done it on your own, you will explain obviously with full confidence. Anything you are able to explain with the full confidence in object oriented concepts or the fundamentals of Apex gives an impression to interviewer that the fundamentals of this candidate is really good, and that is very important. Okay, you might not be knowing what is financial service cloud, you might not be knowing what is manufacturing cloud, but if your fundamentals are good, then those things are easy, you can learn anytime. But if your fundamentals are not good, and let's say you have 4 years of experience, 5 years of experience, then the interviewer will have an impression that this candidate has not worked on fundamentals and he just kept on piling the number of years of experience, but fundamentals are wrong. So the first reason of rejection most of the time happens is that because fundamentals are wrong. Okay, fundamentals are not good. So that is why I want my students to have good fundamental knowledge. Okay, if you have good fundamental knowledge, then be it Apex, be it any other language, you will be able to learn anything. Okay, so those who feel uncomfortable with these kind of topics, like what is when to use virtual, when to use abstract and all those things, stay there. Try it on your own. Don't rush through this topic. Don't start writing trigger directly. Okay, you can write trigger directly and you will be able to move ahead in your career, but your fundamentals will always be weak. So don't do that. Okay. Anybody has any doubt between what is the difference between private and protected, and when to use private versus when to use protected?
So, like this is the only reason, right? So when we are extending the class of the parent one to child, so then like we were able to use this protected. I mean, like we can
Correct,
access the variable of first class one, right?
correct, correct, correct.
Okay, thanks.
And see, every line can have question. When you go for an interview, you write a particular code. When they ask you to write trigger and all, they can ask any question. They can ask any question in any line, and you'll have to be comfortable explaining. So there was a question earlier that can we use private with the inner classes? Yes, we can use private with the inner classes. Okay, can we access anywhere? We have got a question. Can we access any variable inside any method in other class which is not declared in any keyword like public, private, protected? Okay, you're saying that there is nothing. Then it will be private by default. If you're talking about not having anything, if I just save it like this, it will be private. So if I try to access it in the second class, then you will be seeing that variable is not visible. It will be more like a private. Okay. And with classes, you cannot have this functionality. So if you will not define any access modifier with the class, you will not be able to save it. Okay. So you will have to define a access modifier with the classes. And if the with the variables or methods, you're not defining any access modifier, then it will become private. Okay.
Okay,
What
my
real-time use cases of protected? Okay. See, you will have to identify you are creating a class, you are creating methods, you are creating variables. Okay, so let's say you are the owner of that class. You will have to make sure that your variables and your methods are should not be used illegally, or they should not be used for the purpose. No one should be able to change the behavior of your methods or variables. So when you make your variables protected, that means that you don't want any other class to be able to change them or to be able to use them. Let's say you have a class which have the which have information related to the bank detail or any other information which should not be exposed to other classes normally. It should only be exposed to the classes which are extending this class. So in that case, you will not create it as public because you don't want that to be exposed. You cannot create it as private because if you do that, then any other class which is extending this class will not be able to use that. So in that case, you can use the protected access modifier to be able to allow that variable to be used outside of your class as well, but only in the classes which are extending this. And the classes which are extending this should also be known to you because they are extending, so they can not only extend it, they can also modify the behavior of it. So you have to see what is the need from that particular variable. If that variable should be available outside of the world as well, or if that variable should be available within your Salesforce instance so that anybody can use it, or if that variable cannot be exposed outside of this world. These are to basically ensure that you, if you have to, let's say, ensuring the abstraction. So let's say with that variable or with that method, you are doing some abstraction and you don't want outside world to be to be able to understand how it is doing. It's just that you want to do it. So in that case, you can make it private and outside of the world will not be aware about how it is doing. Okay, so then we can use the protected keywords. And same goes for other access modifiers as well. It depends on need. It's not like we create them and then we create them as public always. No, it depends on need, and you'll have to figure it out on yourself or with the functionality that if it should be private or if it should be public. Okay, protected is very rare case when you have classes which extends each other, then you will use protected, and your protected class or the class which is extending will be able to access that variable. Okay, so it depends on need rather than other thing. Yes, Manjunath, go ahead.
yeah. Regards to this inner class, uh, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, you are explaining this, or I'm asking this question before to that. I mean, if the outside class is public and inner class is private,
Mm-hmm.
in which mode will usually system will run?
See,
I
system.
mean, class.
See, this is a public class. Okay, it's just that you don't want to expose this inner class to the outside world. Okay, so
Hmm,
anyone who is outside of this class will try to access this class. They will be able to access this class. But as far as this inner class is concerned, they will not be able to access it directly. So whatever variables written inside it, whatever methods written inside it will not be available outside, will not be available to the outside world. See, this class was also public, right? But then when you created this variable as a private, they were not able to access that, right?
hmm,
So class being public does not mean that anything inside that class will be available to everyone. Okay, because
Okay.
you saw that this was private, so they were not able to use this variable even when the class was public. So class being public does not mean that everyone outside of the world will be able to see anything inside it. Okay, within that class you want to hide the functionality written inside this, you will make it as private and you will not expose this to the outside world. Okay.
How about the variables passing between these two classes?
See, if even if it is private, whatever you have written inside this class will be accessible within that class. So even if it is private, it will be accessible within that class, it will be available. When we made it private and we use it inside this method, we were able to use that, right?
Correct.
So within that class, it will be available. That's the purpose. We want to use it only within that class. We don't want that particular variable or that particular method to be used outside of that class. That's when we have to use the access modifiers to control that behavior. Within that class, obviously you are creating a variable or a method inside the class to be used, right? Not to be just to have a placeholder. So within that class, it will be available even if it is private. But outside, when we use access modifier, our intention is to prevent it or expose it. That's the only intention, to use different access modifier so that other classes and other methods can use them. We are creating a particular method or a variable inside that class to be used, right, to have some behavior or functionality. But
Mhm.
outside of the world should be able to use it or not depends on which access modifier we use. And that is why it is very important to focus on which access modifier we should have with in front of which variable or which method. Okay, if you are not sure that if that particular method, so see, let's say if it is a helper class. So in that case, helper class obviously will be called from the main classes or the controller classes, right? So in that case, you cannot have private methods or private variables because this is a helper class and the main purpose of helper class is to have a functionality which we can reuse. So if in case that functionality need to be reused and need to be called from different classes, then if you'll make it private, then what's the need of it, right? There is no need. But let's say it's a main class and you don't want anybody else to be able to access it, in case like it has a functionality which you don't want to be overridden or which you don't want anybody to tamper with. Okay, in that case, you will make it as a private method and then nobody will be able to uh, touch it. Nobody will be able to make changes on it or nobody will be able to use it or you can say misuse it. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm. See, these are the things which most of the time people cover in a line or two. Okay, they'll say public is public, private is private, global is globally available, and protected is very rarely used. And that's how they will end this access modifier. But this is an important thing. This is fundamental thing, and I don't want you guys to rush through any of the fundamental thing because that will be things which will on top of which you will be able to build your programming skills and increase your programming knowledge. So focus on fundamentals. This might be very fundamental for few people who already have worked on these things and know these things, but those who are new or those who are coming from learning admin and wants to learn development, these are very important things to be focused upon. Okay, all right. One other very important questions they ask in an interview to mostly freshers is that what is the difference between list and set? Okay, anybody wants to attempt that? What is the difference between list and set, guys?
Set cannot have repeated values, repeated key values.
Set cannot have duplicates. Okay.
Yes, duplicates.
List consists of indexes and set is not.
Hmm. List is an ordered collection of the
Yeah,
value.
A list has indices and set does not have.
Correct.
Mohit, I do have a doubt.
Yep.
Mm,
Right.
so if it's a wrapper class, see, we will be having some variables inside the wrapper class. So whether
Bilkul.
it will be good to make it as private or public in a particular class.
See, wrapper class, most of the time we create to return something or to, let's say, get data from someone else's. So I don't think it will be very good to have them private, but once we cover wrapper classes, we will make use of making it public and private both. Okay, most of the time you will have publics, but
Mhm.
it depends on why we are using that wrapper class. Okay,
Okay.
so we will see that. Let's remove this error. Okay, so I wanted to cover that difference between list and set and then map. Map is very important, guys. Those who are not comfortable with map or don't understand map, try to spend at least 1 day on map, just map, nothing else, because map is very important. When we do triggers, we will see that how important maps are. Maps are extremely important from the programming point of view, or whenever you kind of go to the next level in your programming, you will see that how you play with maps. Without knowing how to play with maps, it will be very difficult to write a good trigger, because most of the trigger problems like loop inside loop or like having something sockle query inside the loop can be resolved by using maps. So maps are extremely important, and I want you guys to focus a lot on maps. Let me know if you want me to cover maps in one session. Okay, I feel that this is basic and you guys can do it on your own, but if anybody is not comfortable, I am happy to cover that in a session. Okay.
Yes, sir, I want.
Hmm. Priyanshu is saying yes, he wants a session on map. Anyone else wants a session on map?
Uh, even like I want.
Yes, Mohit.
Yes,
One
Mohit.
session.
Map is very important. I have seen in my project.
Yeah, maps are extremely important, and we can have different kinds of map. Like uh, normal map, you can see like if I create a normal map,
Yeah, map inside map and map inside list.
map
These
inside.
things are
Yeah, obviously, see map like this where we have ID and then list of, let's say, object, contact. This kind of map is very important. We use it a lot because whenever we'll have to, let's say, create a map between account ID and the list of contacts associated with it, we will use this format. But it can also be like map, and then inside the value we have another map, which will again have value and let's say list of contact. So these kind of maps are also available. So it is map inside a map. Okay. So let's cover it in a session because maps are very important. And once we move to triggers, we will see that how we are using maps. So maps are very important from writing good programs, and that's an advantage we have over flows, is that once we get maps, we can play with it. We need not to have multiple for loops or loops inside loops. We can use maps and get our desired result. See, the day you understand map and how to use them in triggers, that day will change your uh, writing approach of triggers. Okay. When I was new, I was able to write triggers, but I was never able to understand why we use maps. Like literally I was not able to understand. I always try to use different ways to avoid maps. Okay. Then one of my friend sit with me, and then he taught me how to use maps and maps inside maps and how to play with maps. He just kind of opened my mind towards map, and from that day I'm writing programs in a different manner. So maps are very important, and I want you guys to have the same feeling which I had that day. Okay, so let's cover maps in one session. Let me see if we can do it tomorrow. Okay. All right, the next topic we are going to do is constructors. Okay, anybody wants to cover? See, wants to attempt what is constructor? Okay, let me. Yeah, Manjunath, go ahead.
Yeah. Constructor is something like in order to instantiate, I mean, what is it? Load your initial values.
Hmm.
Uh, okay, of an object. And we have a multiple types of constructor, like we can have parameterize, we can have non-parameterize, but we can have only one at a time in a class. We cannot have multiple copies of that.
Correct. Okay, right. Let's create a class and see constructors. Okay. If I talk about definitions, it says that constructor is a special method that is used to create an instance of a class. Okay. It initializes the value of the variable in object and set the state of object. Okay. So we will see what we are trying to say here. It does not have any return type. Correct. It does not have any return type. All right. Let's create a class, call it constructor example. Okay, now let's say we have two public string first name and another method public string second name. Okay, and then we have a method public void display name. And here we will system.debug. We will write first name and let me call it last name to second name. Okay, this is a simple class we have. Okay, now how we gonna do it is if I want to access this if we want to access the first name or last name, how we gonna do that is we can either have we can create the instance of the class. If I debug this, let's create the instance of the class. My example supposed to new. Okay, and then we can write it like this. Okay, and just stay with me. Yeah, constructor name should be the same as the class name, correct? Otherwise, it will treat that constructor as a different method, and then it will say that this is not. If I will we will see that. Don't worry. Okay. If I try to use different name, my example dot. Okay. My example dot last name supposed to be, and then I want to. And let's try to execute this. Okay, we are able to access it. So a person who don't know what is constructor, okay, a person who don't know what is constructor, and if he gets to execute this, he will do it like this. So he will create an instance of the class and then he will assign the values to variable one by one, and then he will call the method. Okay, now what constructor is that? Constructor basically, if you see the definition, it says that it's a special method that is used to create an instance of the class. Okay, so when you do this, this is the by default constructor available in your class automatically. Okay, so it's if you have not defined any constructor on your own, then Apex will create a new constructor. I mean, every class has a constructor, whether you create your own constructor or if not, then constructor is already available. You do this, right? new and instance of the class, this is nothing but the constructor. Constructor construct the instance of your classes. Okay, so that's where we use the constructor. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I will create a constructor here.
Mohit, I have a question here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is like instance, right? The first line constructor example, so only the part when it begins with new constructor example, this is called constructor.
Yep.
Or in class, okay.
This is the instance variable. This is
Okay.
the class name, and then this is the constructor. Constructor create the instance of your classes. Okay, so when we write this new constructor example, it creates the new instance. So same like when you go to account, let's say you want to create a new account. You click on new, right? When you click on new, the new page comes in where you can provide the name and value and everything. This is nothing but create in the back end. What happens is that on click of this button, a new instance of account class got created. Okay, so same thing happens in the back end as well. When you create this line, when you write this line new constructor example, this create the instance of your class. It's like clicking new button so that you can create a new account. So similarly, it's like clicking a new button and creating the new constructor example class so that you can provide the values and you can use the methods and variables, whatever you want to do. Okay, so it's like creating the new instance of the class. Okay, are you able to relate it with this example when you
Yeah,
click?
so the first line completely is this form.
Sorry.
The first line, like this
Uh-huh.
first line is completely the form that you are showing right now.
Yes, it is like
Complete
there
form.
there is an account class. Okay, and you have created the new account is equals to new and here account. Okay, so it's like that. When we click on new button on account, this happens.
Okay.
Okay, and this allows us to provide values on account like account name, account email address, and everything. Okay, and then when you click on save, it's like new account dot save method. This gets called when you click on save button so that we can save it. So save method will have a behavior to save that values, whatever you provide in this new account. Okay.
Okay.
You guys are able to relate this?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So now let me create a constructor. Okay. First, I am, let's say, going to make it public. We have to have same name. Otherwise, it will not treat it as a constructor. In that case, it will treat it as a different method. So if I use it as a different name and try to save this, it will give us an error. Will say that invalid constructor name. Okay. Or if I want to use it as a method, then we have to give a void as a return type. Then it will treat it as a method. Okay. So now let's use it as a constructor. And what we can do here is that we can pass the uh, first name and last name here. Okay. And here what we can do is that first name equals to and last name equals to. See, most of the time you will be creating classes where you will have to protect these variables. These variables should not be publicly accessible. Okay, so you will have to make them private. You don't want your variables to be manipulated directly. Okay, so what you will do is that most of the time you will make them as private, and then there will be a constructor which will be used to assign values in them. Okay, so now I need not to do this any longer. Okay, the class which is calling this particular method, the class which is calling this particular method should know that what values to pass here. Okay. And here in the constructor, we will assign it. Just give me a second, guys. Huh? Sorry, guys, I'm back. Okay, so what I was saying is that the class which is calling this method should know that which values to pass to these variables and not. So these variables are now private, and we will have to pass the values directly in the constructor. So here we can pass the values directly, like
Okay.
okay. And now if I want to use this, I will just click on execute, and I should be able to display it. Okay. So we will repeat again. What we did is that these were the public variables. Okay. But it is not a very good idea to have variables public, because then anybody can manipulate the value of it. Okay. But what we want to do is that we have created a constructor, and then in that case, the class which is calling, or the any other class will be calling this particular class, right? They will be passing the values directly to the constructor. Okay. And I have shown you how a person who don't know constructor will do. They will just create the instance of it and directly assign the value. But if in case this is private, then they will not be able to do that. Then they will have to pass directly value to the constructor. And here what we did is that
Instance.
we directly pass the value in the constructor. Okay. So this is the constructor. This will get called whenever you will do this, and this will assign values to the first name and last name variables for this particular instance. Okay. And then this method will be called, and this will print it. Okay. So constructor is a very important where to initialize the value for that particular class. Okay. And you will see different kind of constructors. So there are, we can say that there are multiple questions here, and we will cover them one by one. So first question is that, can we have multiple constructor in the Apex class? So the answer is yes, we can have multiple constructor in the Apex class. The only condition is that they should have different signature. Means we cannot have a constructors, we cannot have a same constructor as two times. Okay. So if we want to have a if we can have multiple constructor, then in that case, we will have to provide different signature. That means if we have a same constructor, we will get an error that it is already available, method already defined. So we should have a different signature. Okay. So if I try to do this, I will be able to save this. But why will I create a blank constructor? Okay. So let's say we have a constructor which assigns value directly. Okay. Let's say it is okay. So we have two constructor now. Okay. If any class which will create the instance of this class, and if it will not provide any value at all in the constructor, then by default, this will be triggered, because this constructor defaults the value. This constructor will by default assign the value. So if there is no value provided in the instance, then this will be printed. Okay. And if the value is provided, then that value will be printed. Okay. So let's execute this. Okay. So you can see that in this case, the default constructor got called, and we were able to print Shivangi Tripathi. Otherwise, if we provide the value here in the constructor itself, then that value will be printed. Okay. So that answers you one question. Can we have multiple constructor in an Apex class? Yes, we can have multiple constructors, but they should have a different signature. Okay. That's the only condition. Now, the second question comes in here is that, can we call another constructor from a constructor? Yes, we can call another constructor from a constructor. That is also possible. Okay. So if I have to call, let's say, okay. If I have to call this constructor from this constructor, then I have to, or let's say, let's call this constructor. Okay, so this, and I'll have to provide the variable value here. Okay, so let's say I just want to show you how to call this constructor from another constructor. Okay, so let me pass a different value here. Let me call it proof. I'm putting my whole family here. Okay, let's see. There is no such line. Okay. Now what I want to do is that if anybody create the instance of this class and does not pass any value in it, okay, then that means this default constructor will be called. Okay, and what I want to do is that in that case, I want to call, if this constructor will get called, then from this constructor, I want to call the parameterized constructor. Wherever we have parameters, we call it parameterized constructor. Wherever we have a blank constructor, we call it non-parameterized constructor. Okay, so what I want is that if anybody creates the instance of this class and no variable or no value has been provided in that instance, then we will call this constructor and we will pass Dhruv Tripathi as the first name and last name. Okay, so if no value has been provided, then we will print this. But how we will print this? We will call this constructor, parameterized constructor, from a non-parameterized constructor, and then it will be passed. Okay, so let's see that. And we are able to see Dhruv Tripathi as a result. So we have seen how we can call another constructor from one constructor. Anybody has any doubt in this, how we did that? And
Sir, I don't understand this bracket and proof to party, this example.
okay, so what we are doing is that we are calling another constructor here. We have this constructor. This is, let's call it constructor 1, constructor 2. So from constructor 2, we are calling constructor 1. Okay. Why we are calling it? Because we have, let's say, created this class in a way that if nobody provides the value, so ideal use case of is that whenever you will create this instance of this class, you will provide the value here of first name and last name. But in case somebody creates the blank instance, like no value has been provided, in that case, the default value should be printed as Dhruv Tripathi. Okay, so I could have done it here as well. Like I could have written it like first name equals to Dhruv and second name equals to Tripathi. And in that case, this constructor will be called and will be printed. But I want to show you how we can call another constructor from this constructor. So this and then parenthesis, and there are two parameters. Do we have any constructor with having two parameters in it? This is the constructor which has two parameters in it. Okay, so we are calling this constructor from this. And this is the way how we call another constructor from one constructor. Okay.
Okay, got it. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Manjunath. Go ahead.
Yeah. The foremost question is like, are we allowed to have a parameter, constructor with two parameters with the different data types?
Yeah, we can create
Okay. Okay.
constructor.
The further question is,
Mm-hmm.
if I have an integer
Mm-hmm.
and I have a double,
Mm-hmm.
okay, if I'm just passing the number,
Mm-hmm.
like whatever we are passing this instead of in this we are passing instead of string we are passing some numbers.
Mm-hmm.
How do it is going to take? It is going to take based on their precisions. Like if it is 1, it will go for the integer. If it is 1.0, it will go for the double, or is that the case?
If it is, let's say, it will take it the order it has written. So if it is, let's say, integer, it is double and you have written double here. When you are passing it, you have written double here and you have written the integer here, then it will give you an error. Okay, that some data type mismatch kind of
No,
error.
I have the constructor of all the types. I have a string, integer, double.
Then it will call the const. See, if you have written double here and integer here, then it will call the constructor which has double here and integer here. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it will see the parameters and the order as well. Okay, that is why first name has printed as Dhruv and second name has printed as Tripathi. Otherwise, it would have mismatched it as well sometimes. So it will take the order as well. Okay, it's same like when you call another method from one class and then you pass some parameters, it takes the order as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So, so like I just had a one doubt.
Yeah,
So the constructor, everything is fine. So like how this display name method is getting executed here?
we are calling this display name method, right? Here in my
Yes.
example dot display name, this is the line which is calling the display name method. So we have created an instance of this class and called it my example. Now this instance can use anything inside this class because this is the instance of constructor example. Now my example can access anything, first name, last name, this constructor and display name as well. Okay, now my example, whatever value we provide here, like here we have created an instance without any parameters, so it will be able to access this constructor. The compiler will be able to understand that we are calling a non-parameterized constructor because we have not provided any input here. Okay, and if you try to pass, let's say, a different value 1 or 20 and try to execute this, you will get error because there is no such constructor which takes integer and integer as an input because we have not defined any constructor here. So we can only pass the valid values as well. Okay, so there is one blank constructor, and even if there is no blank constructor, you will be able to call it like this. It's just that value will not be displayed. Okay, so if I don't do this or comment it out, and if I call this, okay, there is no constructor. Just a second, constructor not defined. So in that case, we'll have to provide some values as well. Okay. So from here, it will be able to understand which constructor we are talking about, and it will check in the class if we have that constructor or not. Okay. And if we don't have, it will throw an error. If it has, then it will call that constructor. So in this case, this constructor will be called, and this constructor is calling this constructor. Okay, how will you understand which constructor is calling which constructor? By looking into the parameters it is passing and then finding a constructor which has those parameters. Okay, there might be possible. See, very rarely you will have multiple constructor within the same class. Okay, I'm just telling you from the interview point of view. Sometimes they try to trick you by saying that there are multiple constructor. How will you call one constructor from the other constructor? Okay, so from that point of view, I'm telling you, how will you identify which constructor we'll have to call from the parameters? Okay, and then we will assign the values to first name and last name, and then those values will be displayed by this line, my example dot display name, because we are trying to access the display name method. So it will go to display name and we'll try to see first name. First name value was assigned here in this constructor, Dhruv, because we have not passed any value. Had we passed any value, it will assign that value. Okay, in that case, this constructor will be called, right? This constructor will not be called at all. So if this constructor will be not called, then this line will not execute at all. If this constructor is getting called automatically, then this constructor will assign value to first name, last name, and those will be displayed by this line. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I hope this is clear to you guys. See, few times you will see, and in few cases you will see it like this. Okay. So they will also write this as the same name as your variable name. So don't get confused by this. And here they will write this dot first name equals to first name. And
This is what we write all time.
yeah, so that is why I'm telling you, don't get confused with it. Last name. Okay, what happens is that to avoid confusion, they do that. Like You will say F name is different, first name is different. So to avoid confusion, they do that is that, see, whatever is written on the left hand side, okay, this is your class variable. Whatever is written on the right hand side is which you are passing. Okay, so if they both are same, then how will the compiler get to know that which first name you are talking about? So we'll have to use the this dot first name to tell that this is the class level variable. This is the class level variable. So that's why we use this keyword here. Okay, and this whatever is on the right hand side is what you are passing here. Okay, so to avoid confusion, I have used the different name so that you will not get confused. But in your Apex classes, or let's say you join a new company, there is an Apex class written, there are very high possibility that it will be written like this. Okay, so yeah, like we do in the LWC, and we will cover this keyword a lot in the LWC because that is a bit different than this. In the Apex, you will use this keyword very rarely. Okay, yeah, it refers to the current instance. And in Apex, you will use this keyword like this only. And when you will have to call another constructor. So these in a single class, you are able to use this keyword twice. Okay. If you'll have to call another constructor, you will use this. And if you'll have to assign values like this, then you will use this. Okay, so don't get confused by this. Whatever is on the left hand side is your class variables. Whatever is on your right hand side is what you are passing. Okay. Okay. And
Is
sometimes,
there any
sorry.
no, is there any number that we have to pass, like this many parameters only you can pass, or is there like
Yeah.
how many?
If you have a constructor which is taking two inputs, two string inputs, then you can pass only two string inputs. Okay. You cannot pass three. Let's say if I
No,
try to pass a three, then it will say that no constructor defined with that input. Okay.
no, in the fourth line itself, I'm saying we can add n number, right? But
Yeah.
there's no restriction for it.
You should have variables here as well, right? To assign those 10.
Yeah,
10.
yeah.
You can define here 10 also, no problem with that. And just assign value to 2. That is completely okay. It's just that whenever you will create the instance of it, then in that case, you will have to pass the 10 variables there, by like 10 values there. And then based on what you pass in the first two, that will be assigned here. Okay. So you
And
can
like when
pass.
it comes to this private, right? So how will we know okay, we have to use private at this particular place and public?
See, that is the structure you
It's
will have.
only the constructor. It's only for the constructor. My dot is related to constructor itself.
See, you were saying that if there are three private variables, how will you get to know that you will have to pass the three, right?
No.
Uh-huh.
Like here you said like first we were using public, right?
Mhm.
Then we have changed it to private. So my
Right.
question is like, how can we figure out like while writing this particular code,
Mm-hmm.
second and third line we have to use private. We can't use public.
You will,
So is it a choice?
no, you will have to see it, what functionality this class is doing. Is it okay to make this variable public? And
Okay.
then the natural answer will be no. This contains the, let's say, the customer's PAN number and customer's legal name. And we should not expose these variables directly because in that case, any other class can tamper with it. Okay. So in that case, only the classes which are allowed to will do it via constructor. Okay. And here we can have some checks as well. If let's say legal, if the first name contains this does not contain any offensive word or anything like that, then only assign it. So we can also have some conditional checks here in the constructor as well. Okay, so otherwise anybody will be able to directly assign value to the first name, and if they can assign an abusive word to the first name, they can use that, right? So we can have some checks here as well. Okay, this is helpful when you'll have to legally identify, or uh, let's say if this is a PAN number. Okay, in that case, you will have to have a specific format on the PAN number. So you will not allow anybody to directly access this because then they can have any value assigned to it. So what you will do is that you will create a constructor and then you will let them pass the value here, and then you will check the value here first and then assign it. If it is valid, then you will assign. Otherwise, you will throw an error or whatever you want to do. Okay, so constructor also allows you to do some processing as well on that data which is passed by. Whereas if you will directly pass to variables, there will be no such checks. Okay.
So
And
basically, it depends on the requirement also, what
yeah,
kind of
most of the
variable.
time it depends on requirement. Whenever you have to hide those variables to be accessed directly, then you will make them private and use constructor to assign values. Okay. Yep. Yep. Harshal is right. He's saying that by using this, we are providing internal security to our logic.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, we can use this. Chandresh is asking, can we call constructor like this? Yes, 100%. That's how we call it. And then we can have the checks in our parameterized constructor. If it is a valid name, then only this, then only assign value. Okay. Okay, Chandresh. Yes, Manjunath and Swapnil, go ahead.
मोहित, मेरे को ये पूछना था कि जैसे मेथड नेम, मेथड के अंदर से हम इसको कंस्ट्रक्टर को कॉल कर सकते हैं दिस ए सी बी डी डाल के?
मेथड के अंदर से आप कंस्ट्रक्टर को कॉल नहीं कर सकते हो. ओके.
ठीक है, ठीक है।
Mohit, in Visual Studio for controllers, there we have a different way to call the constructor, right?
In Visual Studio.
No, sorry, not in Visual Force. We have a controllers, right?
Yeah,
We have a standard controller and we have something. I don't remember.
we have those are different. See, we are not talking about anything on UI here. LWC, Visual Force, and Aura component. When we go there, we will talk about it. This is just for Apex. For now, just understand this is just for Apex and we are covering fundamentals of Apex. Okay? Nothing on the UI side. That changes a lot of things.
Yes, Mohit. If the class is a global class, like consider we are developing that class for the integration purpose. So the constructor, the access specifier will be also the global or the public only.
See, if, okay, let me show you that thing. Okay. Because showing will be important. If I make this as a global, you're saying, okay?
Yes.
And then you can make this global, you can make this global. See, if class is global and your constructor is public, even they'll be able to access class, they will not be able to access the constructor, right? So we'll have to make this as global as well, right? If we are making a class for integration, then we will have to make sure that we are making almost everything global except the variables, because we don't want them to pass values directly to variable, because we want to have certain checks on variables as well first, before assigning the values. So in that case, you will make them global.
Yes. Thanks, Mohit. It was just to confirm clarity.
Okay, there is one more doubt I just want to clear before moving on to the next topic. Okay. Sometimes you will see it like this, okay? And it will be like get first name. Just a second, guys. Somebody is at to. Just a second, huh? Okay, sorry. Return. Okay, so sometimes what happens is that we will, instead of directly passing the values here to the methods, we will create the getters. Okay, and instead of directly using the value here, we will use the methods here. In few Apex classes, you will see it like this. Okay, it's just a different way of doing this. So what we did is we created this class constructor and assigned values via constructor, and then we are not allowing methods to directly access the variables. Instead, we are using the get methods. So instead of using directly the variables, you are using the get methods to access the value. Now, whatever processing, if you have to do some large processing inside this method to first validate the input and then formatting the input, or let's say you have to do a number of things here before assigning particular value, then you can do all those processing here. And then instead of using directly variables, you can use the get methods here. So it will also display the same way. Okay. So if I execute this, my son is not well today. He's not going to school. Okay. So if we do that, then also we will be able to access that. So instead of using them directly, we have used the get methods, and you will, this is very common way to do this. You will see this in a lot of Apex classes, and that is the reason why I am also showing you how it is done. So we have covered constructor and we have covered access modifiers. Try these two things on your own today. And if you guys have any doubt, note them down on sheet or feel free to put it on chat. See, it instead of increasing complexity, it will make things smoother. Because see, sometimes what happens is that we will have a lot of variables and bas bhaiya, it will not actually increase the complexity because it's straightforward way of doing it, and it depends on how we actually do that. Few companies make these rules that we will not directly access the variables. Instead, we will use get methods to get them. Okay, so in case we'll have to change anything, we will have to just change in the get method, because we will not get to know that how many times we're using that variable, where we are using that variable, names can be duplicate. So all, there are a lot of complexity around it. So if a company decides a rule that we will use the get methods to get a particular variable, in that case we will use get. But otherwise, most of the time you can normally see it directly as well. I almost use it directly, but few companies use it via get methods. Set variable name works same way in, I believe. Yeah, setting is also the same way. Setters and getters. See, when we talk about setters and getters, and we will talk more about them in the LWC, because we use them there a lot. Here we are setting it in the constructor and getting it via get method. Okay, but when we do it in the LWC, we'll have get and getter and setter both, and we use them. We have to use both at the same time. Okay, so a lot of things to be covered in the LWC as well. But I hope the constructor, the basic constructor questions are clear to you. Can we have multiple constructor? Yes. Can constructor name be different than class? No. Can we call a constructor from another constructor? Yes. How we can do that? By this, and then in the parentheses, you will pass the parameters of it. Can we have multiple constructor with the same parameters? No, we cannot have multiple constructor with the same parameters. And the why constructors are important. You see that why constructor do we use and Salesforce by default creates a non-parameterized constructor by default, even if you do not create any constructor. So that we have saw by new and then class name, that is by default constructor already available in your class. So I hope this class was helpful. Let me know how was it. Did you like it? Did you see the difference in the teaching pattern? See, I have not covered these topics in much detail in our first batch, because we kind of rushed through. And then later on, I realized that there is a gap between understanding. Okay, so that is why I want to be very careful with this batch, and wants to cover almost everything which is important in my opinion. Okay. In a normal day, I would have done it just by examples, just by questions and answering those questions. But with this class, because we have limited number of people, we get limited questions, we have liberty to go ahead and do it with the help of examples as well. Okay.